So anyone who started to learn how to make video games knows that you're faced with two major decisions. Either you follow tutorials and you learn how to make games that way, or there's another route. You try to recreate some of the great games of the past. And that's exactly what I did. I gave myself 3 days to recreate Asteroids from scratch. But the problem is, I've only been learning C++ for a few weeks at this point, and most importantly, I'm not allowed to use AI throughout the entire project. 20 days ago, I set myself a challenge to try to create a commercial Steam game in 18 months, starting from zero experience. So if I fail to recreate Asteroids in 3 days, that commercial game's timeline goes out of the window. So to recreate Asteroids, we have 3 main objectives. We need the player to move, we need the player to shoot, and we need asteroids to spawn, and a lot of asteroids to spawn. And so I got to work. And my beginning kind of looked like this. I was only able to move my character 1 pixel at a time from the way I had it configured. So yeah, not off to a good start. So eventually I had to increase the amount of pixel moved per input. So then I managed to get it to work. Not properly, but the player moved fast. But there was a problem. I couldn't get it to rotate. No matter how hard I tried, no matter the amount of different equations I put into that rotation variable, I just could not get the triangle or the rocket in our scenario to spin. So I had to dust off an old math textbook just to figure this out. And I realized that getting a player to rotate, it's just all trigonometry. I remember being in high school laughing about never having to use it. But finally, after some calculations, after implementing some formulas, I managed to get the rocket to rotate. So the player moves. We can now tick off the player move. 2 tasks left. Now, what kind of game would Asteroids be if the rocket wasn't allowed to shoot? So it didn't take me long, but I managed to get the rocket to shoot some laser beams. But if you can see, this current implementation doesn't look perfect. And I kind of broke it trying to fix it. I kept trying to change how the rectangles came out of the rocket itself. So then at times the bullets didn't move at all. Or at other times they were just heading in one direction. And at other times it was just completely random. I had no clue how it was working. But then I took a time to reflect and I realized that in the original Asteroids game, they didn't have to deal with this. Why? Because of one simple fact. They use circular bullets. So as soon as I figured that out, I changed my bullets from rectangles to circles. And also I didn't want to recreate a bare bones version of Asteroids, so I kind of added this special ability where if you press Q, the rocket sprays out bullets. So it's a feature I thought was pretty cool. And it's going to be a fun way where I implement it into the actual gameplay loop, so keep watching to find that out. Now we begin the hardest part. We have to recreate the asteroids. And as I was coding this, I gave one comment to my class. This is going to take a fucking while. So like every budding game developer making a prototype or any game, instead of the actual object, I started with a rectangle. And I knew that I had to get the rectangle to spawn. And then I managed to get the rectangle to spawn, but it wasn't good enough. The asteroid has to spawn, and then you have to be able to kill the asteroid, and then more have to spawn. That's basically how the game progresses and gets more difficult. But there was a problem. I couldn't figure out how to do that. So first I broke the spawning system of the asteroids, and it took me a little bit to figure out how to fix it, but I did eventually manage to get the asteroids to spawn properly. And then we were left with another problem. My rocket could just fly through the asteroids like they didn't exist. Like we had some sort of magic power up allowing us to float through every single asteroid. So what did I do? I added collisions to my game. So collisions are basically just checking whether one object hovers over another object, and that's basically how collisions work, very simply. So with collisions added, the asteroids for now were completed. And then I ended up with this boring, basic looking version of asteroids that doesn't even look as good as the 1979 version. So I thought, especially considering the fact that I'm making a YouTube video out of this, I had to make this exciting somehow. So I started by adding stars. Then I added some asteroid art, and shout out to this guy. He basically made sure that I didn't have to learn pixel art in 1 hour. I added sound effects, pew pew, and I made a cool rocket flip. I fixed some more stuff about the collisions, changed it from rectangular to circular collisions, so the game actually looks like the rocket is hitting the asteroid before it loses a life. I added a life counter, that's important for asteroids. I added a score as well. And like I mentioned before, with my special ability, I didn't want it to be just some overpowered ability that the player can use at any time. So what's the main objective of asteroid? Get as much score as possible. So the special ability costs you 500 score. This means that if you want to use a special ability to get out of any situation, you basically have to give up some of your score to do that. So it makes you think, oh, when is the right time to actually use my score? When should I use the special ability? I created this version of asteroids. I renamed to Asteroids Plus. Yeah, Asteroids Plus. The worse but better version of 1979 asteroid that I made in 3 days. I fixed some more stuff, and then I can't ship this with the game, but I went to Epidemic Sounds and I plugged in an asteroid soundtrack into my game, and this is how it turned out. In 3 days, we managed to recreate asteroids, and my challenge of creating a Steam game in 18 months remains believable. At least to me. I hope no one heard that. They might think I'm a bit crazy. And I learned a lot in this process that I didn't even cover. I learned about object pools. I learned how to organize my programs. I learned about Raylib, which is probably the most important thing that I forgot to mention this entire video. I never used a game engine. I just used a graphical framework. I think that's what they refer to Raylib as. It's basically as good as a game engine. And you get to learn way more whilst using it. I learned how to make a rocket rotate. And I realized that in my time in high school, where I sat at the back and laughed about never having to use trigonometry, I had egg in my face. Because ultimately, for me to have to complete this project, I needed to use trigonometry. This is a full circle moment. Anyways, this was quite the adventure. And it's only going to get more intense. It's only going to get harder. So you need to subscribe to see how this 18-month journey to create a Steam game unfolds. Because at the moment, it seems like it's going well. But the next few videos are really going to show you the struggle.